All right, welcome, Brian.
Hi, Ted. Good to
Uh,
talk to you at last.
so let's get straight into it. Welcome to the Esoteric Beat. My guest on the show today is Brian Johnson, who has recently authored a very cool book on necromancy in the Medici Library. Welcome,
Thanks
Brian.
for having me.
So I sent you a list of questions, and I don't have them in front of me. I'm going to try and channel them. So the Esoteric Beat show, the reason I invited you on is, I'm interested in the intersections of counterculture and the esoteric. And so I thought it was great to have somebody who knows a thing or two about what Richard Kekeffer called the clerical underworld. Can you tell us how your book brings up issues surrounding the clerical underworld, what you might have learned about the authors and users of these texts?
Yeah. Um, there's not a lot that we can concretely know about the individuals who either initially composed the material in this grimoire or the particular scribe who produced the copy I worked from in the late 15th century at Rome. Um, we can be reasonably certain that most of these people, especially before the 16th century and the Reformation, would have been clergy of some station, simply because that was the social class with the necessary learning to make use of these texts, and also a lifestyle that would facilitate the often extensive periods of fasting and ritual purity that the texts prescribed. Um, and of course, we have evidence of this with more than a few magical manuscripts that have been traced to ecclesiastical libraries like St. Augustine's Canterbury, or the Laurentian Library in Florence, where the present manuscript is kept.
So that brings me to another question I can remember we discussed. Where are you at having written this book on the vexed question of religion, magic, and science?
Okay, so in the periods that I study, uh, I would say that there was effectively no categorical epistemological distinction between what we would call science, religious doctrine, and magic. Uh, the material cosmos, with all of its interwoven parts, was on one hand the object of natural philosophical inquiry and speculation, but it was also regarded as the book of nature, literally written by God and kind of allegorically encoded with divine secrets and occult virtues that only the faithful would have the necessary enlightenment, which is, to say realistically, scriptural education, to perceive these secret forces that they could harness. Um, and these were both equally valid ways of knowing the material world. They were forms of scientia, um, and and both of these in different ways underpinned the magical practices that aim to work within that world, from talismans utilizing the mutually attractive qualities of stones, herbs, and celestial bodies, uh, all the way over to rituals invoking the ministering angels of God, who were in their own way uh, just further links in the chain of being that connected everything else in the cosmos with its ultimate source in God.
So, it occurs to me we've jumped right into my questions, but I haven't given you a chance to introduce your book. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about the book? And I know you've talked a lot about it on the other virtual book tours you've done. So I do want to get into the esoteric beat stuff, but go ahead.
Sure. The uh, the edition that I've produced is it includes a transcription and English translation of a number of excerpts from a manuscript that currently held in the Laurentian Library in Florence, Italy. That is a collection. Well, the manuscript itself, as a whole, is a roughly 600 odd page collection of all sorts of esoteric, occult uh, operations and knowledge, um, put together sometime in the late 15th century. Everything from demonic conjurations to geomancy to what seems to be a little bit of medical alchemy, even. Uh, and I've pulled together a collection of excerpts, kind of around the theme uh, of necromancy in both senses of the word, both the demonic conjurations and consulting the dead for knowledge. Um, and put together a sampler of those for readers.
So one of the things I like about your book is that I feel like it let's say it problematizes my concept of Renaissance magic, right? So when I think of Renaissance magic, I think of the gentle Marsilio Ficino, right, playing on his lyre and translating the Hermetic corpus for the Medici, his Medici patron, right? Or Pico della Mirandola tripping out on Pseudo Dionysius and the hierarchy of angels in order to explain Kabbalah to the Christians, right? But these guys who were doing so-called Renaissance high magic, we don't hear quite as much about this weird grimoire stuff.
Right, and I wrote a little bit about this in a short article that I think showed up on Hadean Press's website to go along with my book, uh, talking about the long Middle Ages. Um, and while you're certainly correct that all of this hermetic magic was being rediscovered in the West, from mainly from Byzantine refugees in the uh, late 15th, going into the 16th century. Um, all of that messy necromantic and demonic magic that had been compiled, uh, from the 13th century onwards, it was still there. uh, and the people who regarded it as efficacious never stopped using it. They just as my as the present manuscript I worked on, I think demonstrates to a certain extent, just began combining it with the astrological magic and knowledge coming in from the east.
So this clerical underworld, was it a counterculture?
I don't know how much of a counter culture it was. At least in any conscious way for its members. I certainly don't think that the monks who were copying these necromantic texts conceived of themselves as rebelling against either the established church, let alone Christian doctrine. Um, I mean, for for one for one for one thing, the spiritual authority of their office, which could only really exist within the framework of the church, would have been a significant source of power in confronting demons during an exorcistic ritual. Um, and the very texts of those rituals, uh, typically in their language, only go to reinforce the operator's place as subordinate and dependent upon this hierarchy of authority that descends from God through the church down to the humble practitioner. Uh, now, would they have had to make some pretty elaborate and, frankly, sophistical arguments to convince themselves that what they were doing was in any way legitimate within a scriptural context? Absolutely. But I don't think they were self-consciously opposing the culture that really sustained virtually every aspect of their practice and their lives, really.
So here on the Esoteric Beat show, we're interested in how I'm thinking of Claire Fanger's book, Rewriting Magic, right? And she's paying attention to the kind of reports of the visionary experience that her guy had, right, working on the grimoires. And I'm thinking about kind of contemporary culture and reconstructions of magic. And I'm wondering about the users of these texts, and whether you think that there was something analogous to like psychedelic or visionary experience that the users of these texts were having, or was it more of just a sort of intellectual game of copying copying these texts? Like, people were using these books, right, and kind of working with them and sort of believing in the magic. Like, what evidence do we have that they were actually having kind of paranormal experiences while using these books?
I mean, we have virtually no evidence of well, I should say, aside from possibly Gilbert and Davis's recently published, what the manuscripts of Gilbert and Davis, recently published by um, Al Cummins and Phil Lagarde as the Excellent Book of Magic. Um, we have virtually no practitioners' records of what exactly they experienced using this kind of material. Um, and so I can only speculate, but I suspect this any kind of a hallucinatory or liminal experience during these kinds of operations would have been down to the individual practitioner. I mean, I I, I know some people are just naturally more predisposed to enter, something like a hypnagogic state of consciousness under certain conditions. But apart from things like yeah, the Ars Notoria that Claire Fanger studied, which is pretty explicitly a meditative practice. Uh, for the most part, the rituals of conjuration and exorcism don't strike me, at least, as especially likely to induce that kind of experience in most people. Um, so beyond that, I really don't know.
So when they were like conjuring spirits to a visible appearance, we don't have we don't imagine like the kind of like Aleister Crowley experience.
I mean, again, Crowley may have been one of. I mean, I can speak from firsthand reports that I've had from uh, modern day contemporary practitioners who do report, visible or auditory manifestations during their practices. Um, I can't speak to the the validity or I can't verify that myself. Um, but like I say, some people are predisposed or more able to perceive these types of manifestations than others.
Yeah, I'm thinking about how John Dee had to find somebody who was good at scrying, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, that brings me to another question, and one of our overriding concerns here on the Esoteric Beat show is what I think it was Dr. Amy Hale hit me to this term, the broom closet, right? Like a lot of academics who or independent researchers such as myself who study this material are in what we call the broom closet, right? It's like people kind of practice this stuff. They may not full on believe in magic or whatever, but we do mess around. And so I wonder if you're comfortable talking about this. Were there ever any kind of weird experiences that set you off down this path of studying magic, or has it always been just kind of an intellectual question for you?
Uh, I can't say that I had any weird experiences that set me down this path. I think it's always been much more a case of of traveling down the path looking for the weird experiences. Um, like I've said before elsewhere that I've always been fascinated by this kind of stuff, by mythology, folklore, myths and legends ever since I was a kid. Uh, and it's just the kind of thing that I've always uh, kept an interest in and kept looking for new evidence of something beyond the material world. Uh, and on one hand, that's led to academic studies in anthropology, history, um, publishing these old forgotten manuscripts. And on the other hand, yeah, I dabble in this stuff in various ways.
Got you to admit you dabble. All right, that's an interviewer's score right there. And so, that brings me to another thing. And while you're here, I want to take the opportunity to geek out. You are also involved in the tabletop RPG world. And the question I have for you is, those White Wolf games like Mage the Ascension, Vampire the Masquerade, Changeling, Werewolf, all that. Are these games designed to suck people into the occult?
I certainly don't think they're designed to do that, but I'd be lying if if I didn't admit that discovering, in fact, Mage the Ascension when I was, probably 12 or 13, uh, played a pretty big role in setting me down the road that I've followed for most of my adult life. Um, I mean, just presenting presenting a world in which you know h- real historical uh cross-cultural magical traditions were not relegated to history and anthropology books, but were real living practices in the modern world, was really changed the way that I thought about things like magic and offhand some of the offhand citations and references that authors like Phil Bricado slipped into to their manuscripts um, definitely set me down some illuminating pathways of reading both fiction and nonfiction.
So, I'm reminded of how when I first got into this stuff, I had a much different idea of what magic was. Let's say, I said to one kid on Twitter recently, like when I was 20, I knew a whole lot more about the occult than I know now. Right. And I feel like my view has really become disenchanted in a lot of ways. However, I still believe that there's this core of truth that kind of magic is real, right? There's something going on there. There's something without necessarily saying like magic is paranormal or whatever. There's something to it. It's worthy of study. People make things happen by practicing this esoteric stuff. And so I still feel that there's kind of a core of truth to that keeps me in this work. So I wonder if you can say anything about where you're at in terms of you've been studying this stuff for decades. How have your views on what is magic changed since you started your project?
Well, uh, I think my current perspective on magic, at least, uh, as it was and is actually practiced, rather than I might have imagined it as a school kid. Um, uh, I think I've gradually come to recognize that, and this actually kind of goes to what you were saying about a disenchanted view of magic, but maintaining it as a real thing. It was always much more generally integrated into the everyday life ways of any given culture um, that actually recognized it as a real thing, at least. Um, and like I suggested before regarding magic, science, and religion, uh, it's it's part of the common epistemological infrastructure uh, of of those cultures that recognize it, and it's always been practiced in one form or another for basically identical purposes um, across the kind of demographic boundaries that get thrown up inside of these cultures, whether that be, socioeconomic class or sex. Um, it magic was never just practiced by either an elevated scholarly elite or the pariahs who were cast out of normative society for whatever reason and were, vengefully cursing their neighbors for it. It was like I say in different forms, but for everyone who used it, it was a technology to improve their quality of life.
So that brings me to a question about your book and the introduction of the book. There's some scholarly throat clearing about the word necromancy itself. Can you say a little bit about the difficulties in establishing exactly what do we mean by necromancy?
Well, sure, and uh, the problem arises uh, from uh, the variety of ways that that word has been used over the past, you know, 2,500 years. Uh, it literally means a form of divination using the dead, from the Greek necromanteia. Uh, that was the original sense of the term. By the time we get to the late Middle Ages, uh, it's it's become something of a back formation from the the semi-related term negromantia, which would literally mean something like black divination, but more broadly was understood to mean black magic or bad, evil magic. Uh, and by some kind of folk etymology, that definition got reattached to the term necromancy, and so uh, in the late medieval or Renaissance context, when we find the word necromancy used in a text, it most often is being used in that latter sense as a form of just evil magic, more or less. Typically, making use of spirits as the operative agents to affect it. Um, what makes this particular manuscript I've worked on kind of interesting is that it actually deals with necromancy in both senses. At least one of the operations is explicitly concerned with the literal use of the spirit of a dead man to acquire knowledge. So necromanteia.
Doesn't get more explicit than that. So we're getting close to the end of our half hour. I don't want to ask my guests for more time than that. This is the Esoteric Beat, where we ask, or many people have asked me, do you know the secret? And I'll be happy to tell you. It beats me. We've been talking to Brian Johnson about his book Necromancy in the Medici Library. Very exciting collection of translations of some very ooky, spooky grimoire material. What's your next project? Do you want to tell us about where you're moving in the world of magic?
Oh, I have nothing firmly in mind, but that's kind of how all my projects go. I have nothing firmly in mind until something suddenly jumps out at me, and I spend the next 4 months working on it until it's finished. uh,
Well,
uh, but I've got a number of things that I'm working on and off. So some interesting characters in the history of alchemy from the Elizabethan period. Um, that may or may not turn into anything concrete if I ever get access to the manuscripts that I desperately need to see to finish it. So if it ever does come to light, I guarantee you'll be the first to know, Ted.
right on. Yeah, it's an exciting time to be studying Elizabethan alchemist, right? We just had that awesome book by Jenny Rampling come out, The Experimental Fire, which really put Edward Kelly on the map as a alchemical player, right? Very cool stuff. Any other publications happening in the world of magic, magic translations, the grimoires you're excited about? You want to tell our readers?
Well, not my own certainly, but recently from Hadean Press, there's been a release, the Clavis Goetica, dealing with kind of a history of Goetic, well, of Goetic practice as really originally, and I think the authors would argue essentially a form of necromantic practice that kind of traces its lineage all the way back to the cephalomancy or skull divination of the ancient Near East, all the way up through 16th century Europe, which I found really fascinating.
Very cool. I had a conversation with Joseph Peterson at the last Kalamazoo meeting. I was just really grilling him on that Goetia of Dr. Rudd book, which is a total trip, right? And like, how did those characters get made? How do those sigils of the critters? Like, some of it reminds me of the method for drawing sigils on a magic square, right? Where you got those little conventions, and they're kind of like scribal conventions, right? And it all goes back to the characteries of the PGM, right? Do you know much about those weird images? Because I feel like those images of the Goetia is one of those places it's hard not to point and think these guys are having some weird trippy visionary experiences, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, certainly the characteres from the Greek, the Greco-Egyptian tradition are likely one source. Um, I know that working on the manuscript of the Testament of Solomon that I published a couple years ago from Byzantine Greek materials, obviously much later than the PGM, but they bear some striking resemblances to some of the sigils that we find in Arabic sources from a couple centuries before in things like the Picatrix. So I definitely suspect that that may have been at least one vector by which this material came back around to the Latin West.
Very cool. Thanks once again, Brian, for being here. I always end the show with an exhortation to be curious.
Thanks for having me, Ted.
Have a good one, Brian. See you next time.
You too.